Nova, Asteroids, Spark of Life. Then at 9, it's Secrets of the Dead. Tonight on TV8.
Bondador, Sam westbound near the Hardy Imperial Valley area, working an accident. Gulf Freeway headed in around the Dixie Farm Road area. Reports of a new accident as well. Rainy conditions right now. 68 for the high, 60 for the low tonight, 72 for Thursday. Rain moving in Friday, and then icy conditions over the weekend. We're going to be in the 20s and 30s depending on where you are. So get ready right now because a hard freeze on the way. The National Weather Service is telling folks to stay home if you can. 64 degrees right now. It's KUHF Houston News 88.7. A service of the University of Houston, 9 o'clock.
President Trump, in a speech this morning, touted what he sees as economic accomplishments, but his own foreign policy moves may be overshadowing the case he's trying to make. I'm Craig Cohen. Today on Houston Matters, we discuss foreign policy, the economy, and more 1 year into Trump's second term.
Houston Matters with Craig Cohen is a production of Houston Public Media with support from Baylor College of Medicine.
We talk politics every Wednesday in our political roundup. Today, we'll walk through some fast-moving developments with the Baker Institute's Mark Jones and Party Politics co-host Jeronimo Cortina. Also this hour, NPR's Frank Langfitt on what he heard last week from Houstonians reacting to U.S. intervention in Venezuela. Plus, we check in with Houston area entomologist Erin Mills about the varied world of insects. We'll start with the news update from NPR and News 88.7. Stay with us.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. President Trump says he won't use the U.S. military to invade Greenland. He spoke today to delegates at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Trump asked for immediate negotiations on Greenland, but didn't sound optimistic.
We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. Okay, now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force.
But later in Trump's speech, he also said Europe can either say yes on Greenland and the U.S. will be grateful, or they can refuse and, quote, we will remember. There were gasps in the auditorium when Trump jabbed Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. Yesterday, Carney said when countries like his negotiate with a hegemon, they do it from weakness. Carney says countries that negotiate like this are essentially acting as though they're sovereign nations, but they're accepting subordination. Stocks opened higher this morning as the Supreme Court hears arguments on whether Trump can fire a member of the Federal Reserve's governing board. NPR's Scott Horsley reports the Dow climbed 340 points.
Fed Chairman Jerome Powell was set to be in the audience as the Supreme Court weighs arguments on the president's power to remove Fed governors. By design, the central bank's supposed to be insulated from political pressure. Powell's accused the Trump administration of trying to drive Fed policy through intimidation. Berkshire Hathaway appears to be ready to unload its stake in Kraft Heinz. The giant food maker was one of Warren Buffett's less successful investments. Berkshire owns about 28% of Kraft Heinz, which announced plans last fall to split in two. And discount airline Ryanair is dismissing Elon Musk's suggestion he might buy the company after dispute over installing Starlink Wi-Fi on Ryanair jets. Non-Europeans are prohibited from owning a majority stake. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
Doctors in Minnesota are sounding the alarm about federal immigration agents and hospitals. From Minnesota Public Radio, Erica Zurich reports some patients are worried about being targeted in medical facilities.
Physicians are voicing concerns for patients as thousands of federal officers have poured into the state. Dr. Erin Stevens is the legislative chair for Minnesota's section of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. She says the presence of ICE agents intimidates patients and obstructs access to care.
Many of our patients, undocumented immigrants, naturalized citizens, and U.S.-born citizens alike, fear leaving their homes for access to health care. They express to us a feeling of being hunted.
Stevens says that some patients are giving birth alone, while others are missing, canceling, or postponing prenatal care appointments. For NPR News, I'm Erica Zurich in Minneapolis.
On Wall Street, the Dow is up 320 points. The Nasdaq is up 170. This is NPR.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Kauffman Foundation, providing access to opportunities that help people achieve financial stability, upward mobility, and economic prosperity regardless of race, gender, or geography. Kaufman.org.
Live from News 88.7 in Houston, I'm Matt Harab. Local officials and forecasters are asking you to prepare for a weekend of winter weather as a massive storm approaches the state. Impacts are projected to be less here in Houston compared to the north central parts of Texas. However, the National Weather Service says the Houston area will not be spared. Our Tom Perumian spoke with forecasters earlier this morning, and he joins me live now. Good morning, Tom.
And good morning, Matt. We are looking at the potential for a hard freeze. That's expected across most of the area. Haley Bailey is a meteorologist with the National Weather Service. She tells us the highest risk is on the north side of Houston, north of the I-10 corridor, Friday through Sunday morning.
We're looking at a widespread major impact for most of the southern continental U.S. Friday through Monday. Looking at travel being next to impossible from Texas to Oklahoma and east to the Carolinas.
Now, since the freezing rain will likely start Friday night, possibly run through the weekend, Bailey says people are urged to put off long-distance travel if possible. Matt?
All right, Tom. ERCOT and Centerpoint both say they are ready to respond to any power outages that may occur. Both organizations are pointing to improvements that have been made to the grid after Winter Storm Uri 5 years ago. Houston officials are expected to give an update today about planning for the storm. We'll keep you updated with the most up-to-date forecasts throughout the rest of this week here on News 88.7. Meanwhile, Congress has allocated its first round of funding for the Ike Dike since it was authorized back in 2022. Our Natalie Weber tells us the project is expected to receive $5 million in federal funding.
The Coastal Texas project, known locally as the Ike Dike, will include a series of barriers off the Gulf Coast. They're aimed at protecting the state's coastline and petrochemical industry from storm surge during hurricanes. The project could cost at least $35 billion. Coulter Baker is the executive director of the Gulf Coast Protection District, which oversees the state's coastal projects.
It shows that the federal government is willing to invest in this vital project, which is really what you need.
The bill allocating funds is awaiting President Trump's signature. The state has allocated $950 million to the project. I'm Natalie Weber, News 88.7.
And early voting in the runoff election to fill Texas's 18th Congressional District seat in Congress has begun. That's to fill the seat previously held by Congressman Sylvester Turner. 17 voting centers are open now through 7 p.m. I'm Matt Harab, News 88.7.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Good morning. Thanks for joining us here on News 88.7 and Houston Public Media's YouTube channel. Coming up this hour, what NPR's Frank Langfitt heard from Houstonians about the Trump administration's moves in Venezuela, and a chat with entomologist Erin Mills from Enchanted Forest Nursery in Richmond. First, though, while President Trump spoke this morning at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, and sought to make his case for what he sees as economic success for the U.S., his foreign policy forays are overshadowing that message, including his planned establishment of a board of peace that would appear to rival the United Nations, but with Trump firmly in charge for life. To discuss those foreign policy moves, the economy, and other developments in our regular Wednesday political roundup, we are joined today by Mark Jones, political science fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, and Jeronimo Cortina, professor of political science at the University of Houston and co-host of Houston Public Media's Party Politics program. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Craig.
President Trump continues to threaten to raise tariffs on European nations and NATO countries that oppose his effort to purchase Greenland. So let's start there. Again, a reminder, Greenland is an autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark and is not interested in being bought, and Denmark is not interested in selling. What's the latest, Mark?
Well, Donald Trump in Davos has said that he will not use military force, at least today. That could all change, but that he would ratchet up tariffs and engage in a tariff war with Europe, Denmark in particular, but also the European countries supporting Denmark, if they did not yield and effectively give up Greenland. Of course, hanging over that is that the Supreme Court could rule any day now on President Trump's tariff authority and perhaps tell him, essentially rule that he cannot use the tariff authority under emergency powers that in security that he has been using.
This has been his threat for just about every foreign policy maneuver desire that he's had. that he'll just raise tariffs if the Supreme Court should come back and say, no, you can't do that the way you've been doing it. Does that scuttle all of his plans?
Well, I think that it's completely 100% irrelevant what the Supreme Court says, right? What other leaders have said in Davos and what we have seen in the past days, especially with Europe, is enough is enough. So the fact that they are unflinchingly just going to respond to whatever 200% tariffs on champagne and wine may happen.
Yeah, which he threatened to France if they don't get on board with his
the Board of
Peace, and we'll get to that.
But the question here is what the Europeans are going to do. And today what we heard is the president of the European Union said very clearly is we have $100 billion in tariffs ready to go. And the European Parliament did not pass the free trade agreement that was passed last year with the U.S. So it's enough. What Prime Minister from Canada said, it's also very clear. We're in a different ballgame. And we need to understand that we need to play in a very different field. So I think that puts President Trump in a position where he never saw any retaliation. And now that retaliation is going to start coming up. And that's a problem.
Just in terms of Greenland, what's the end game here?
It's not entirely clear. I mean, much of what President Trump is talking about in terms of security could have been quite easily obtained through a bolstering of the treaty that already allows the United States to do quite a bit militarily there. This seems more political theater in the sense that he wants to sort of show he's uber powerful and able to essentially get Europe to come on bended knee and give him Greenland as tribute, perhaps emboldened by his success in Venezuela. Right? You know, if the extraction of Nicolás Maduro had not been so successful, maybe he would not have been so emboldened vis-a-vis Greenland. But that's where we are today. The end game, though, is that Europe isn't going to yield on this. And so I think the best the United States can hope for is some type of treaty that grants the U.S. more power, more influence in Greenland, which is what they could have achieved without all of this conflict and potentially starting a trade war where everybody loses.
All right, let's talk about this Board of Peace. The president initially characterized it, and it was approved by the UN as a group that would oversee Gaza as part of a ceasefire agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. That ceasefire hasn't really held, we should point out, as more than 1,700 Palestinians have been injured or killed since it was announced. What should we anticipate seeing in Gaza, first of all?
Who knows? Nobody knows. And it's one of these things, especially when you're thinking about the new geopolitical international map, in the sense that President Trump comes with an idea, but that idea doesn't have like the steps to get that idea implemented in real life. And as you said, the ceasefire has not held. And there is still a lot of questions that we simply do not know what's going to happen. And just as a parallel is the same thing as Venezuela, right? Take out Maduro, but the regime's still there and everything's still, and there is no clear plan, only, get the oil out and that's about it. But the next week, we don't know what's going to happen.
And I want to get to Venezuela as well. There's just so many. But let's stick just for the moment with Gaza. What are the chances, Mark, that this board and the president's other ideas for establishing and maintaining peace there will work?
Relatively low. It's sort of solving Gaza, solving the Israel conflict has been something that's bedeviled of presidents for quite some time, and including many presidents with Secretary of States who are far more skilled than Marco Rubio, such as James Baker, for instance. But I don't think it's really going to resolve anything. And so I think we're likely to see a continuation of the conflict there and probably have to wait till the next Israeli elections to see if Benjamin Netanyahu can continue as prime minister, or if by this time next year we have a new prime minister that perhaps takes a different stance intact vis-a-vis Gaza.
And I guess we should note that Netanyahu today said he would join the Board of Peace. As Trump admits, he has higher aspirations for it. as a potential UN rival. He's saying that's not beyond, that's a possibility. What else should we know about this Board of Peace at this point?
Well, that it's pay as you go, or the price tag to participate in the Board of Peace is $1 billion, and then you can have a seat at the table. So it's just one other way of extracting, money. We don't know what that $1 billion would get you, and we don't know what that $1 billion will be used to, if it will stay in the Board of Peace for rebuilding Gaza, or if it will go somewhere else to the Federal Reserve. We simply do not know what that would get you.
We do know that Trump would chair it in a lifetime appointment beyond his time in office and until he chose his own successor. Its executive board is being handpicked by Trump and includes his own son-in-law, among others close to the president. So far, some countries are agreeing to take part, others are not. And as you noted, France has been balking so far. So the president is threatening France with what he says would be 200% tariffs on wine and champagne if Prime Minister Emmanuel Macron doesn't join. What has Macron had to say so far about this?
Oh, it's very negative. And I think, as Jeronimo was mentioning, I think for Europe, this is sort of a line where they've up till now been placating Trump and trying to effectively appease him. This is one of those points where they're saying, no, enough is enough. And at the end of the day, in the sort of best case scenario for this Board of Peace, it lasts until Donald Trump leaves office in January of 2029.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. It is one thing for a sitting president to put himself in charge of an international diplomatic effort while he's in office. It's quite another to say this would be a lifetime appointment, that he could handpick his own successor. Can that be legal?
No, I can't see any success, or even say if it were J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio effectively going on with that, along with that, once Trump is no longer in office. It's a temporary thing. It's a vanity thing. But in terms of actual political importance and influence, it's pretty irrelevant, at least once Trump's term in office ends.
Practicality aside, the legality, this is, I think, probably a significant issue here, because if it's deemed an official act that he's establishing this, then it applies so long as he is president. But then the next president comes along and should be able to do what they want, or the UN, which approved the beginning of it as a means to broker peace in Gaza, should be able to do something about it. If it's not an official act, if it's something that he wants to do for the rest of his life, then he shouldn't be able to use his office to do that. Isn't that what the Supreme Court basically said? That he was immune from prosecution for official acts, not ones that aren't.
Right. But here the fact of the matter is, if any international treaty or whatnot has to go through a legislative process, that's the law of the land, and it's going to be very hard just to do it by executive order on the one hand. So let's suppose that it passes the Senate and it becomes a law of the land. Well, for country W, what happens here is completely 1,000% irrelevant, right? There is no international treaty. There is no international law. There is no body that is a international recognized organization that could say, yes, this Board of Peace is legit. Just what the UN has said and the General Assembly has said is like, okay, fine. You can start this Board of Peace as something that is going to move the ball rolling a little bit. But that's it. So if 5, 6, 7, 8 countries create that, that's going to be like the G7. It's another private club where countries get together, but whatever the G7 says, or whatever this Board of Peace says, is completely on the margins.
Mark, the G7 comparison is a good one. I was thinking more of like FIFA or the International Olympic Committee, these sort of self-designated bodies that seem to have a lot of power over certain things, but nobody really controlling them.
Well, yeah, I guess FIFA, though, at least does control the World Cup, and so it does have the ability to exercise influence there. They essentially own the brand, and can, whereas this new Board of Peace doesn't even have that going for it. More likely than not, this is just another way that people are appeasing Trump in the interim. But as his power wanes over the course of the next few years, this will fall by the wayside, and he could even lose interest in the short term, in which case by this time next year, we'll have forgotten that it exists.
We do this every Wednesday. We're discussing the latest developments in politics and what they mean for us here in Greater Houston. More ahead from Rice University's Mark Jones and the University of Houston's Jeronimo Cortina as Houston Matters continues on News 88.7 and YouTube.
Hi, I'm Lenny Ambrose from St. Arnold Brewing Company, proud supporters of Houston Public Media. Right now, with your $60 donation, you can choose tickets to News and Brews. This member-exclusive event takes place February 17th. Enjoy a pint, connect with fellow NPR fans, and meet the Houston Public Media Newsroom in person. Select News and Brews tickets when you donate at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate.
Is less scary than teenage life on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Check it out today at 3, followed by Marketplace at 6:30.
Support comes from Moody Center for the Arts, presenting Imaging After Photography, opening January 23rd from 6 to 8 p.m. An exhibition exploring the intersection of photography and AI through May 9th. moody.rice.edu.
And from Baylor College of Medicine, with 125 years of innovation behind it, Baylor has driven progress in health and medicine through research, education, and care that push the frontiers of modern science.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. We're in the middle of this week's political roundup today with Party Politics co-host Jeronimo Cortina and the Baker Institute's Mark Jones. According to the Financial Times, European opposition to those Greenland and Board of Peace efforts we were just talking about has led to a delay in a planned announcement of $800 billion in economic support for a post-war Ukraine, which is supposed to come from the U.S. and Europe. Could the president's moves here scuttle that entirely?
At least it could delay it. And I think one point of leverage that President Trump does have over Europe is effectively withholding the U.S. contribution for Ukraine, based on the argument that what happens in Ukraine is far more relevant for Europe than it is for the United States.
Meantime, U.S. military forces boarded and took control of another oil tanker connected with Venezuela on Tuesday. This is the seventh time that has happened since the administration sought control of Venezuela's oil after U.S. forces seized and arrested its leader, Nicolás Maduro, on narco-terrorism and drug trafficking charges. Venezuela's sort of getting lost in the shuffle in all of this, is it not, Jeronimo?
Well, 100%. And there is extreme ambiguity in terms of what's going to happen. It seems that President Trump is happy with the interim president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, her brother, Diosdado Cabello, and everybody that he was part of the unique circle of Maduro. So we don't know anything in terms of what's going to happen with Venezuela. Maria Corina Machado has given President Trump her Nobel
Peace Prize.
Peace Prize, sorry, and just attempting to get into the mix of what's going to be the future of Venezuela. But it doesn't seem that anything is going to happen in a very rapid way, or that there is a plan for a more orderly transition to a democratic Venezuela.
You mentioned her effort to hand over her Nobel Peace Prize to President Trump. Doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
I think everybody understands that. But it's an interesting piece of the puzzle here. Norway's prime minister shared a message he received from President Trump Sunday night. Trump wrote, "Considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace." Now, Norway does not technically hand out the Nobel Peace Prize. It's decided by a committee elected by Norway's parliament. That aside, what should we take away from that little nugget revelation?
Well, it's still, I guess, it gnaws at his craw that he didn't get the Peace Prize. And so it's something that he's going to now hold against Norway for, as you mentioned, reasons that have nothing to do with the Norwegian government. I would say that was probably more of a flippant remark than anything else. I probably wouldn't take it too literally.
And I also think it's also a strategy that President Trump uses every single day. And that strategy is try to put the person that you're trying to negotiate with directly or indirectly in a bad position. So at the moment that you are sitting at the table, then he would have the upper hand. And we have seen that with Venezuela. We have seen that with potentially with Greenland, Denmark, etc., etc. So the deal is something that is going to be more advantageous for what President Trump wants to achieve.
Ultimately, do you see a clear overarching vision from President Trump about foreign policy based on both words and actions over the first year of his second term?
I mean, it's a much more aggressive foreign policy in terms of he's using the full powers of both the U.S. military as well as the U.S. economy to try to leverage the U.S. influence in the world. Does those seem to not be following a long-term plan, but it seems it's more reactive and episodic, and I think potentially undermines Republican efforts in November of 2026, as many in the MAGA base who supported President Trump precisely because he wasn't going to get involved in foreign entanglements. He was going to concentrate his energies on the United States. It could come back to haunt Republicans, perhaps not in terms of people voting for Democrats, but not turning out at the same numbers to vote for Republicans. So I think Republicans in Congress, I think, are increasingly worried that all this foreign activity is sending a message to Americans that President Trump's more concerned with foreign policy than with domestic policy.
Yeah, what do you think, Jeronimo? It does seem as if this is, to a degree, standing in stark contrast to what many of Trump's supporters once assumed America first actually meant.
Well, absolutely. The argument that the president is making is that all these efforts are for America first, to achieve the goals of the American first policy. And for example, it's the argument that now the U.S. is going to have these huge access to Venezuelan oil. But that's not going to be translated tomorrow or in 1 year or 2 years. What we have heard from oil experts is that this thing could take 10 years to get the ball rolling. The same thing as bringing manufacturing jobs, something that has not been significantly achieved, right? So we are in a very odd time, very similar to the last year and a half of the Biden presidency. The macroeconomy was doing great. The Wall Street was going up like crazy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But let's call it the microeconomy, the kitchen table economy is not doing so rosy. And that's what people are going to be, thinking about. And what Mark said is, you told me that when I go to the supermarket, I can buy cereal that my kid likes. And now you are spending, I don't know how much money on Greenland. I don't care about Greenland. I don't eat stocks or anything like that. I eat cereal, and that's not going to be materialized. And it's a very vivid experience that people experience every single day.
Mark, if this sort of approach continues over the course of the year, I mean, do you see this as being what may lead to a change in the power structure in Congress? And could it be that President Trump's foreign policy pursuits are ultimately going to ruin his chances of getting anything done congressionally or anything done, period, if Democrats happen to get control of at least one house of Congress in November?
Well, they definitely are going to contribute to that, and it's a combination of the economy and people's, as Jeronimo has mentioned, their sort of personal economic pocketbook issues, and then a perception that President Trump is not concerned with the economy in the way that he said he was going to be concerned. Right now, I think the most likely scenario is that Democrats are going to take control of the U.S. House. The question is by what margin. But if things get much worse, they could also take control of the Senate. The Republicans have a nice structural advantage there simply because of who's up for re-election, but it's not a lock. And the worse things get nationally and the more people get unhappy with President Trump and his approval ratings fall, the more the Senate could become vulnerable. And as you mentioned, that means that during the final 2 years of his tenure in office, he's going to have a difficult time, if not impossible, passing any legislation without Democratic support, which is not likely to be there.
Do you think any of this could impact even the primary season and what we see here in Houston in March?
Well, I mean, it could have a significant effect. I mean, we're seeing that some conservative Republicans are trying to be outflanked on the right that have a very serious and very stable conservative record in terms of pursuing fiscal policy, being conservative in social issues, etc., and are being outflanked. So that could have an impact in some primaries. But overall, I think that the support, or at least some of the support of the MAGA movement, can put them ready for the general election. And in the general election is where things can, go a little bit wrong for these Republicans. But especially here, when we're thinking about Texas, we had redistricting. And some of these districts may go the way that it was planned or may go the other way. And once again, like Mark said, it's going to be the economy that is going to determine much of these outcomes.
Mark, speaking of elections, some campaign finance reports have come out in recent days. What can you share and what do they tell us?
Well, one is that Governor Abbott's in a pretty comfortable position. He has $105 million cash on hand. His most likely rival on the Democratic side, Gina Hinojosa, has $700,000, about 100 times less, more than 100 times less. And then same for Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. He has $38 million cash on hand. His most likely rival, State Representative Vicki Goodwin, is at about $200,000. I think the two races where we're going to see the most money spent outside of the Senate race, and we'll have those numbers at the end of the month because they're federal, are the controller's race, where we see Don Huffines spending a good part of his considerable fortune. He's spent $4 million thus far. He has $12 million on hand. And then you have Kelly Hancock, who has the support of the governor, who spent $1 million but has $7 million on hand. And then the attorney general's race, and that's a very important position. We've seen Ken Paxton use it very effectively, and Greg Abbott use it very effectively. They are the two main candidates, are Chip Roy, the congressman, who's spent relatively little, only about $1 million, with $4 million cash on hand, and Mays Middleton, a state senator who has independent wealth from his oil company or his family's oil company. He spent $7 million thus far, with $5 million on hand. His goal is to force Roy into a May runoff. The other two candidates there, Aaron Reitz, not Reitz, like Ken Reitz, the baseball hero, it has only about $3 million on hand, and absent Donald Trump's endorsement, is unlikely to have much success. And Joan Huffman, a state senator from here in Houston, has raised very little money and spent very little.
Jeronimo, early voting is underway starting today in the Texas 18th congressional runoff between former Harris County Attorney Christian Menefee and former Houston City Council member Amanda Edwards. Early voting will continue until the 27th. Election day is the 31st. Considering this is a runoff for a special election and we now have some bad weather coming this weekend into Monday, what are you anticipating in terms of turnout?
Well, I mean, it's going to be, it's the runoff of also a low, I would say, information election, in the sense that not a lot of people understand outside of Congressional District 18. But it could get a lot of traction. Why? Because that position has been vacant since Mayor Sylvester Turner passed away, and a lot of people in the district are not happy. So I think that could potentially have it, perhaps not during this weekend, but I would say that turnout is going to be as we would expect with one of these races in a lot of time.
Jeronimo Cortina is the co-host of Houston Public Media's Party Politics program. You can catch it Friday nights at 7:30 on News 88.7, Friday nights at 8 on Houston Public Media TV 8. It's available on YouTube as well and wherever you get your podcasts. He's also a political science professor at the University of Houston. Mark Jones is a political science fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Jeronimo, Mark, thank you both.
Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, Greg.
And just ahead, what Houstonians have to say about the Trump administration's moves in Venezuela. Our Michael Haggerty talks about it with NPR's Frank Langfitt as Houston Matters continues on News 88.7 and on video at HoustonPublicMedia.org and on YouTube.
You count on Houston Public Media. That's why you're here right now. Take the next step and become a new member today. Every gift makes a difference. And with a gift of $5 a month or more, you'll receive PBS Passport, a member benefit that lets you stream more of the shows you love anytime. It only takes a minute to make a big difference. Join as a new member today at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate or call 800-364-8300.
Our YouTube channel, listen to our podcast, and listen to us live weekdays from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. here on News 88.7.
Support comes from Asia Society Texas, presents The Big Swim, a musical retelling of the Lunar New Year fable setting the order of the 12 zodiac animals, February 20th through 22nd. More at asiasociety.org/Texas.
Support comes from the Dan L. Duncan Comprehensive Cancer Center at Baylor St. Luke's Medical Center, offering comprehensive cancer care that is compassionate, personalized, and driven by clinical research. More at stlukeshealth.org/cancer.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. The U.S. intervention in Venezuela has some direct impacts on a lot of Houstonians who have family or friends in the country. That's what led NPR's national correspondent Frank Langfitt to visit Houston last week. As he tells Houston Matters producer Michael Haggerty, he wanted to hear what Houstonians thought of the Trump administration's actions.
Yeah, I thought Houston would be a really good place to talk to people about the U.S. intervention in Venezuela. And obviously there's been a lot of focus on that nationally, but maybe not as much nationally on what people actually think about it. And Houston seemed like the perfect place to go. Large Venezuelan community, lots of other people from Latin America, got conservatives and liberals. It's a very diverse city that way. Plus you got the oil industry and you have an Air Force base. So I just thought, when I'm trying to do these stories around the country, can you go to places where you can just hear such a wide variety of voices? And Houston seemed like a really good place to go.
And get a lot of those different perspectives in one place without having to go.
Exactly. I mean, that's the other thing is, so ideally it's great if you can go to a single city and it provides all of that perspective.
We're diverse and we're a lot of things happening here, but also very, very big. So you're trying to, move around and get these stories from different groups. I mean, what kinds of people have you been speaking with so far?
Yeah, I was just up in Katy, and obviously your listeners have heard these kinds of stories, but I don't know that they've been heard as much necessarily nationally. Talking to people at a grocery store up there is obviously a very well-known Venezuelan grocery store. And one man that we spoke to for a while, it was really touching. He was going there to pick up a bunch of candies for his daughter because they had to flee Venezuela a couple of years ago, and this was one of the ways that he wants to keep her connected to the homeland in hopes of someday going back. He was extremely happy with what President Trump had done and very glad to see Maduro gone, and he'd been extorted for years in the restaurant business. And so he was very pro. I asked him a little bit about the president's willingness to keep the old regime, in charge, and he said he understood that, because there needed to be stability, but he hoped that wouldn't last for a long time. But he was a very good conversation. Earlier, we're down at the farmers market today and got some very nice voices, a very different kind of voice from a woman from Mexico running a fruit stand there who was very skeptical about what the president was doing and saw it as an attack on sovereignty and, uncomfortable with also saying the impact that the immigration raids have had and concern about immigration, how much it had. She lost 50% of her business in the last year because people were not comfortable coming or not comfortable spending because they're worried about what could happen to them. And so like ordinary people, when there's uncertainty, people hoard their resources.
When you come to a city, come to a place and try to report something like this, how do you go about figuring out where to go and also finding people with diverse voices on a subject? So
you call Houston Public Media and you throw yourself on the mercy of a member station. That's exactly what I did. I've done a lot of this kind of work nationally, but I've done it all over the world. I've worked in Asia, Africa, and also Europe. And so I always look for reporters or friends or other people. And so before I go, I just sort of say, here are my questions. Here's the things I'm looking for. Where should I go? Otherwise, you can really spin your wheels and waste a lot of time. And I've done a lot of really, really bad interviews, Michael. And I try to get what I'm going for is a good batting average. And already today was a good batting average, but in part because people here at Houston Public Media were able to say, oh, you should look at this place, look at this place. And so that was extremely helpful.
As you're doing these interviews at the places people like us and others have sent you to, how do you suss out in an interview, is this person kind of what I'm looking for? Or whatever? I mean, I imagine you can be surprised along the way, but I mean, how do you sort of know, is this an interview that's going somewhere?
Well, usually if it's something that it strikes you as thoughtful, something that does surprise, something that shows, frankly, depth of analysis. And it doesn't have to be an academic level. There are a lot of very smart people who are working regular jobs. I find that you can get lots of very good material from regular folks who are paying attention. And so I listen also very closely to the words and what they're saying and think about how that's going to sound on the radio and how will that connect with our audience across the country. So this woman that we were interviewing, my Spanish is very poor. I learned it like several decades ago. But I could understand a fair bit of what she was saying, and I was working with a photographer who was translating. And even as I was listening, I was like, oh, I can hear this in English on NPR, and this is going to sound really good and easy to understand and direct.
So specifically in the conversations you've had about Venezuela, getting back to that topic, I mean, I know you've got more interviews ahead of you, but I mean, what have you heard so far that has anything surprised you or anything else stood out to you so far?
I don't know that I've been surprised by anything yet. It's more just the very different ways that people in this city would see this issue, based on their politics, based on their heritage, based on how they feel about the history of American intervention in Latin America, which is a long history. You asked this question, so tonight I'll go back to my hotel room where I might work here if I get a desk, and I'll load up the tape and I'll start listening and looking and seeing, what really jumps out. And there's sometimes I'll do an interview where bells go off and I'm like, no matter what I do in the piece, that cut needs to be in the piece. There are other times you'll do an interview and it's a good interview and then you go back to it and you realize there's real gold in there and you didn't quite grasp it. So when I can, what I try to do is every night go back and go through the tape and begin to sort of do character studies and start seeing, well, who are these characters? How do they play off each other? Things like that.
You mentioned the history of the United States intervening in Latin America. When the news first broke about U.S. forces seizing Maduro, I mean, like a lot of people out there, knowing enough about history, I immediately jumped to 1989, 1990, when the U.S. under George H.W. Bush sent troops to seize Manuel Noriega, the Panamanian dictator. He was brought to the U.S. to face drug charges. That all sound very familiar. But you reported just in the last few days, I mean, right after those events in Venezuela, about the differences in those two stories. What was different about them?
Well, I had the same reaction you did. I remember when Manuel Noriega was seized by the Americans. So when I woke up and saw this on my phone, the first thing I thought was Panama. And so then I looked back at Panama, and there are really big differences. One, they got Maduro immediately. And some people that I talked to, analysts in Latin America, said that also showed that how weak Maduro was. He was clearly given up by people inside. Whereas Noriega ended up at the Vatican embassy, and they had to run him out with Guns N' Roses music, as people might remember, to force him out. That's one thing. Some of the other big things is this, and I think it says a lot about the difference between George H.W. Bush and Donald Trump, the way they see the world and America's relationship to smaller countries. George H.W. Bush did not try to derail the plans to hand back the Panama Canal to the Panamanians. Donald Trump said, we want the oil in the industry and we're going to take it over. Drastically different. Another thing is that even before the Americans got Noriega, on the first day that they were in the country, they swore in the political opposition that had won the stolen election. Donald Trump has not done that at all. He's actually kept that regime in place. Now, there's some people I've talked to who think that in the short run that is wise, that Machado would not be able to govern, and he wants to keep things stable. And people I talk to today, and I'm looking forward to talking to more of them, say, well, that's fine for now, but we would like a democratic process, and we do think Machado should be put in power because her party, her coalition won the last election. So those are two really, really big differences between those presidents.
A lot of our listeners will remember hearing you on the ground reporting in Ukraine when Russia invaded almost 4 years ago now, in February of 2022. I mean, what was that experience like?
I was talking earlier today with a colleague, and one of the reasons I wanted to be in Ukraine at that time, and I had a good sense that the invasion would come then, is as a reporter, I've always found it fascinating to be a witness to history, to see it as it actually happens. When I first started as a reporter, I always had to ask historians, gee, what was it like? And I wanted to actually not have to ask that. I wanted to know what it was like. So that was really remarkable because I can remember the night that it happened. We were, I was down in Odessa, and I can remember getting a call from our Pentagon correspondent, Tom Bowman, who's going to be down here in a couple of weeks. And Tom said, the invasion is going to start, be available, be ready. And I can remember hearing the cruise missiles hitting in Odessa. And there was concern at that time that it would be sealed off by Russians coming in attack helicopters. So we work with a team when we cover conflict. And so we had a driver and a translator. And I had to kind of get them up out of bed and convince them that the country was being invaded, and they did not believe me. They had not heard the missiles. They thought that the Americans and us reporters were completely overreacting. And so slowly I had to sort of say, no, everything's changing right now. And eventually we were able to get everybody together and be able to get on the road for a little bit to get out of any potential danger. What's so interesting about covering those kinds of stories is you're in a country where things change every 24 hours. The whole country changes. So by the next day, people were putting sandbags up and creating makeshift checkpoints. And farmers were coming out of the fields who had no real firearm skills and getting weapons to go fight the Russians at the front. So, and it would be the equivalent of being in suburban Houston where everything's complete. I mean, Ukraine, there was no sign of military on the street. It was just completely normal. And then the next day, the history of the country is completely changed.
At the time, I remember just listening to all that unfold and sort of waiting with bated breath, as we all did, to wonder what was the significance of all this. Was this going to be, World War III? Is this the equivalent of Germany invading Poland or whatever? As we all sort of tried to size that up, and here we are now, 4 years almost later. I mean, what strikes you about this war now as it has unfolded and kind of continued in that time? What it's kind of shaped up to be?
I think it still remains pivotal to the future of peace and security in Europe, which obviously the United States has had more than 8 decades of a very close, political alliance with. And I think really when you look at Ukraine, most people I know who I've talked to in Eastern Europe feel that Vladimir Putin's intention, and he says this in his speeches, is to keep going. So even if there's some kind of ceasefire, most people expect that he will continue to arm up during a ceasefire and continue to try to head further west. And there's definitely a big geopolitical battle there. And it's interesting, too, because I don't know how you feel these days, Michael, but it feels like a very unsteady world from the world that I've covered off and on now for more than 20 years. And just a lot of uncertainty. And it's always really worrisome. And that's a, from the European perspective, that's a huge concern. I mean, the folks in the East have always been very concerned about Russia, but most people think that he will keep going. And so that's also a threat to the United States because these are very close allies. It's an enormous economy in the EU, and they're natural allies because of shared political beliefs.
That's NPR national correspondent Frank Langfitt. He was in town last week to talk with Houstonians about the U.S. intervention in Venezuela. He spoke with our Michael Haggerty. Still to come, we turn our focus to Houston's varied world of insects as we check in with area entomologist Erin Mills. Your questions are welcome at talk@houstonmatters.org or 713-440-8870 as Houston Matters continues on News 88.7 and YouTube.
It's not just your car. It's the one that brought your kids home from school, took you cross-country, held memories, laughter, even a few breakdowns. When it's time to let go, give your car a new purpose. Donate it and turn memories into meaningful support for this station. Plus, you'll enjoy free and easy pickup, potential tax benefits, and a simple donation process. Your gift supports the programs you and your family love. Donate today and help keep public media strong. Call or donate online.
Publicmedia.org/donate. See you there.
Houston Public Media is licensed to the University of Houston system, governed by the UH Board of Regents. Information about open meetings, dates, times, and locations is online at uhsystem.edu.
Houston Matters with Craig Cohen is made possible in part by Ellen Benninghoven and Dr. Michael Schaefer, and with gifts from listeners like you.
From time to time, we like to check in with Houston area entomologist Erin Mills to talk about Houston's fascinating world of insects and to field your questions as well. Not of the how do I kill it variety, but more of the what the heck is that kind of question. You can send that now to talk@houstonmatters.org. You can call us as well at 713-440-8870. You can also text us at that number, or you could post a question on Houston Public Media's YouTube channel on our video stream there. Erin Mills, welcome back to Houston Matters. Good morning.
Thank you for having me.
We have a hard freeze in the forecast for a good portion of the greater Houston area this weekend. How do insects deal with hard freezes?
Well, either fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you feel, they're probably going to do just fine with this kind of freeze. It really, people would be surprised to find that insects can sustain temperatures of, well below freezing. I mean, down into the teens or even, negative, temperatures. And so it really takes days of below freezing temperatures to kill most insects. A lot of people are worried about the butterflies. We have monarchs here during the winter. They're not supposed to be here, but they are. We have a winter breeding population. And I've always gotten lots of questions and calls. And the monarchs are probably going to be fine. So they will seek shelter.
I would think if any insect could be threatened, it would be something like a monarch butterfly, something that has a thin layer of wings or something like that that would seem not to be terribly insulated from extreme cold.
Sure, yeah. And insects all have different, some will sort of hibernate, under the ground or in leaf litter, and they'll just kind of sleep through the winter. Monarch butterflies, obviously, they migrate, but one of the reasons why they stay here is that the temperatures are just warm enough for them. And so as long as they're not exposed, if they are, again, kind of out of the wind, even just it's like covering your plants with a thin sheet. How does that keep them from freezing? Well, just a little bit of protection can keep their body from freezing, basically. And so the butterflies, they will find a good place to be. Now, it can get a little more dangerous when we go through these freeze thaw. So if it's going to be below freezing for several days, then they'll just kind of stay hidden. When it does warm up, or if it does warm up, then they might come out and then they might get caught again when it refreezes. But with the rain and just the dark and just, I think they will just kind of stay protected until it warms up and they can come out and fly. So, yeah, they're a lot tougher than people really think.
Should we expect to see more of them seeking shelter inside our homes over the next few
Not
days?
the butterflies,
No.
unless you bring them in.
Right.
But certain creepy crawlies, I guess you might say, ladybugs, especially the non-native or the Asian ladybugs, they have a tendency to congregate in kind of warmer areas, and they might come indoors. Things like roly-polies or other like terrestrial kind of creepy crawlies, they might come in. Cockroaches, all of those things. A lot of these are tropical insects that they just kind of do their thing all throughout the winter. So some of those guys we may or may not see more than normal, than we would during the winter. But
this is not exactly the same category, but I was visiting my parents in South Florida And before, as I got set to hop into the car to leave, I noticed a little baby gecko was hanging onto the side of the car door. And I looked at it and said, "You can't go with me to Houston. No, you're supposed to be here." And it took a few minutes to get him onto a plate and to get the plate into the grass. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm scuttling. Like my plans to get out the door are being delayed by this little baby gecko.
That's so ecologically responsible of you, Craig. That's nice.
Yeah, but I don't know that I would do the same thing for. Forgive me for an ant.
Yeah,
it's just the reality of it.
Would be a very confused ant.
Yeah, indeed. Why do we still see mosquitoes during the winter?
Well, kind of very similar to the butterflies or other things. You just think, well, it's just this tiny little thing. It's got to be so, fragile. It really takes very, very cold temperatures, again, sustained cold temperatures. And so, and a lot of times what will happen is, the adults have a pretty short lifespan, and so a lot of times the immatures, they might be kind of dormant, in their sources of water, and then once it reaches warm enough, and we've had a very warm, mild winter, so they've just been, coming on out, and so they'll go ahead and emerge and come out and do their thing, do their life cycle, and so you just kind of have this issue where it's not cold enough, and it takes, the water's warmer, than the air temperature, so those are going to keep on, keep on living in the water sources. And so, again, it just takes several days of very cold temperatures to actually get down in there and kill those populations.
We have a question from Wendy in Missouri City.
Wendy.
She says, longtime listener and love hearing you. She asks, well, what do I do about fruit flies in my house? They seem to come in on fruit now and again.
Oh, yeah. You got to trap them. Well, you want to make sure that first of all, you get rid of anything that they might be breeding in and that might be attracting them. So any sort of, do a clean sweep of all your fruit. And I, whenever I get them, I just kind of like put everything up in the refrigerator for a few days. And then you want to get some sort of trap. And you can make a homemade trap of just, a glass and a shallow, a little amount of, anything sugary, sweet. It can be apple cider vinegar, it can be wine, it can be just sugar water, or they do sell those traps at the grocery store that come with a little sugary liquid, and those seem to be really effective. So you just want to trap them, and then you'll keep seeing the adults kind of down in there, and as long as you've removed their source of that they're reproducing, that they're eating in, then you shouldn't have any more. It can take a while. It can definitely take a while to to get them all. I will walk around my kitchen just clapping, and my husband will be like, oh, we must have a fruit fly.
What native species are most threatened these days with extinction here in the Houston area?
We're kind of lucky here. We've got pretty robust populations of things. There's always a lot of chatter about the monarchs. Monarchs as a species are not endangered. The migratory population is in danger because they're continuing to drop out of migration. Native bees and things that people don't really pay attention to. A lot of our native bees are, not really endangered, but they're
threatened,
right? Yeah. And then a few species of butterflies, things that people don't think they would miss, because they're not big or, beautifully colored or whatever. But for the most part, most of our insect populations are doing pretty well. But, pollinators are always kind of threatened. And so a lot of our native pollinators. And so that's why you need to come visit us at Enchanted Forest and buy lots of flowers come spring.
Erin Mills is an entomologist now with the Enchanted Forest Nursery in Richmond. Erin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig.
And that will do it for today's show. The Houston Matters team includes Michael Haggerty, Joshua Zinn, Brenda Valdivia, Mincho Jacob, and Laura Walker. Jared Carroll's our technical director. Remember, you can check out Houston Matters anytime. Subscribe to our podcast for the audio. Visit Houston Public Media's YouTube channel for the video. On tomorrow's show, the latest on this impending freeze this weekend across much of Texas. Increasingly, it is looking like that will include much of the greater Houston area. We'll fill you in on the forecast and best expectations of timing and whether and when we might see freezing rain here. Also tomorrow, this month's installment of The Bigger Picture. I'm Craig Cohen. Join us tomorrow for those and other Houston Matters.
Support comes from DeCamera, presenting soprano Julia Bullock and pianist